Hey, I'm Jacob Cooperman, and you were watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with Todd Atkins and Miguel Iturrate. Todd has been involved in covering combat sports since the 1990s, and Miguel has match-made over 200 different events amongst various promotions worldwide. Please subscribe and be on the lookout for future episodes. As for me, you can check me out at Gloves Up on YouTube and Coop TV with 3 O's on Instagram. Thank you guys, and enjoy the episode.
Get after it. All right, it's Todd Atkins here, and I'm back with the Miguel Iturrate, Mystic Miguel, most popular guy on this channel probably, and him and James Wormy. And yeah, so we're doing another episode here together. Not necessarily conspiratorial, but you know, we always call it the MMA Conspiracy Hour here, and we're going to talk a little bit about ZUFFA Boxing and Dana White and some of the stuff here. And Miguel, I kind of want to give you a chance. Everybody, first of all, you know, subscribe, like the video, you know, check everything out here. And Miguel, I want to give you a chance to kind of give your opening thoughts on Dana White 60 Minutes, ZUFFA Boxing, whatever of those two you kind of wanted to talk about.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us again. And I appreciate the Mystic Miguel nickname. I like it. And I think I've made a few good predictions that kind of earned me the name. And Todd goes with it, so I'm happy about that. But I'm also a guy that admits my defeats, and I kind of didn't think Zuffa was ever going to really go with the boxing. It was just going to wind up being talk. Dana did the Terrence Crawford, Alvarez, Canelo Alvarez press conference and stuff like that. And there was somebody else's money backing that fight. But, I don't think that was a Zuffa or a TKO event, really. But now it looks like they've signed a deal. I think it's with Paramount, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're in. So Mystic Miguel was wrong. They are in boxing. I still think it is a tall order. I think Dana's a guy that, I mentioned it before. I think he's a guy that, especially if you start the little losses that he's taken, you can ignore, and then once, especially in his psychology, nothing he touches goes wrong. He thinks he's the best at everything, right? So now here he's going to try maybe to start from scratch with boxing, maybe start building guys up, put out Zuffa belts and stuff like that. And I do think that, boxing and MMA, he's in for a very different road. That boxing, for all it's good and all it's bad, is a much more mature sport with guys that have big money in there. Top Rank, Eddie Hearn, even Golden Boy, who, he doesn't like Golden Boy, but Oscar's got money, and he's got fighters under contract. So this is a very different landscape than Dana found when he walked into MMA. When he walked into MMA, it was a bunch of, regional small shows. You had Pride, but Pride was going to die anyway, Pride was kind of run by, Yakuza or Mafia or Dirty Money. And you could kind of see them beginning to slide. And they almost, when Pride did their Vegas show, which was, I believe, the last show they did, you knew it was a nail in the coffin, that they actually chartered an airplane and bought over like 200 staff, almost kind of as a goodbye gift to people. They were going to die anyway. And when they got purchased by Zuffa actually got them for very, very cheap for that library so that they could shelve it and not do anything with it. They still haven't really done anything of note in the Japanese market. Japanese markets that kind of been hurting for, that superstar Sakuraba guy, or, Yoshida, who was a gold medalist, and They don't have that one crossover guy that, you know, captures everybody's imagination and brings people back to the sport that got rising over there. But the Japanese market's changed a lot. In other words, Pride, you can't compare Pride to Top Rank or Golden Boy or Matchroom. Those are big, mature companies where those guys are going to want to protect what they have. They're not going to want to let Zuffa just walk in and run them over. The MMA world back in the early days of Zuffa had no choice. There was no way to not get run over. You didn't see it coming. Now, the other part of it is that Dana was kind of like, when he came in, he was an outsider. He really hadn't been in the MMA world, slogging it out for 5 years or doing shows on a lower level or anything. So he was kind of an outsider coming in. And, his style of being aggressive and hyper aggressive was revealed. But now it's a known quantity. He's not going to surprise anybody by being, uh, blusterful in this world anymore. There's no surprises that are coming their way. They know the way Dana does business now. So I think he's still going to have to show us what Zuffa really is going to do in boxing, other than, well, what's the best case scenario? That they do what the Premier Boxing Champions did, which is, put together 2 good years, two years where they were kind of getting everybody's attention at the top of the game, and then it's a slow decline, and then they become a marginal player or an average player. Dana's mode isn't to be an average player. He wants to be, save the sport, be the biggest in the sport. So he has a very tall order here to take over boxing the way he did MMA. It's not the same sport. It's not the same business. And his tactics are well known. So we'll see what he does. In 5 years, if they put together, signing young guys. And the thing about boxing that's different than MMA is boxing's got amateur programs. Boxing's got Olympic programs. If you're a 12-year-old with talent in boxing, it's kind of like the NBA. I went to high school back in the old days. It's funny, I'm not an expert on the NBA by any means, but Grandpa Munster from the Munsters TV show, the old man. Some people don't know this. He was a major scout in basketball, and looking for 14, 13-year-olds with talent. And I'm sure he's dead by now, but that world expanded to become. I went to school in high school with a guy that wound up in the NBA, was a third overall pick in the draft. And they knew in high school that they when he was in 8th grade, coming to 9th grade, we always heard, next year we're going to get a guy that's going to the NBA. So by the time you're 8th grade in the NBA, LeBron James was probably younger when they had him pinpointed. That doesn't exist in MMA yet. You every once in a while you hear about a guy like, BJ Penn may have been the one guy that kind of was like, hey, there's a guy coming who's going to be amazing, the prodigy kind of guy. And some grappling guy, but grappling doesn't necessarily translate into MMA. You don't know about MMA prodigies at 12 yet. That doesn't happen. In boxing, you do. In boxing, by the time you start to, Shakur Stevenson had probably been spotted years ago, when he was real young. And so scooping up talent like that, maybe it's already scooped up for that generation. So how long does Zuffa have to wait before they can get the next generation of talent, which means that they're going to be filling their champions either by doing co-promotions, which Dana doesn't really do, or filling them with B-class guys. And I mean, I'm not putting anyone down. B-class guys, they could put on great fights, they could put on great shows, but they won't be the top-notch guys for a long, long, long time. And at the end of the day, Dana's in his 50s. Maybe he lives to be 90 and is a Bob Arum guy. So we got another 45 years of Dana in the boxing world, and we'll see what he does in 45 years. But in the next 10 years, I doubt that Zuffa will be the biggest boxing promotion in the world within that time frame. It's going to be longer and a harder slog than that, unless something major happens. Unless, for example, he were to buy Top Rank, and Bob Arum is probably nearing the end right now. And then Eddie Hearn were to give up and cash out and sell his thing. It'd be a couple $1 billion in purchases there, but that would give him the contracts and the names that he needs to really do boxing at a high level. If not, if those people decide to hold on to their talent, there's co-promotion world. And like we said, ask the MMA people what co-promoting with the UFC was like. Never happens.
Yeah, and Eddie Hearn has already said he doesn't have any intention of walking away. So
Yeah, Eddie Hearn may actually be. I'm not. We probably could look it up, right? But he may actually be a few years younger than Dana.
yeah, he's
Yeah.
looking to compete with him. He's already said that.
So yeah, and he's already got. He kind of put all his chips in the Anthony Joshua basket, and Joshua did have a hype train behind him. Frank Laturzio, who's a longtime boxing analyst. I used to do a show with him on boxing. And Frank's pedigree is from Philadelphia boxing. I mean, he's just sparred um, Joe Frazier back in the 70s, and he was on the Anthony Joshua hype wagon, and I kind of never bought it. I didn't. I found him to be kind of vanilla, but Eddie Hearn kind of put all his eggs in that basket, and so. But he's a resilient guy, and he's got many other guys on the roster, many different weight classes. British boxing is still kind of pound for pound much deeper than American boxing, and anybody who listens to Zuffa from the UK in the boxing world would be stupid to not take Zuffa's offer and go to see Eddie Hearn and see about matching it or if he can do better. That's just what he's going to face. Nobody could consider the old days for UFC. Once Zuffa, was at UFC 40, and they've gotten their kind of legs under them a little bit. They were still paying 2-2 or something like that, but casino owners, and they'd already beaten the boxing commissions were already honoring their shows and things like that, and they were starting to build a little bit of momentum. There was nobody who was taking a UFC offer and going to Hook and Shoot and saying, "Can you match this?" They just would go to the UFC. You know what I mean? Even if Hook and Shoot was potentially going to pay them more for the next fight, which at 2-2 was kind of within the realm of possibility, but nobody was doing that. Now you'd be stupid not to take a Dana offer and go to the other companies out there and see how it goes for you. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to watch, and potentially this could be, I don't want to say a Dana failure, but I think that Dana's going to be hard pressed to deliver a lot of the big talk in the boxing world.
Yeah, because you'd be negotiating against Golden Boy, against Top Rank, against Matchroom.
Yeah,
Guys can, and that would make. Plus, I think with their reputation already for contracts and whatnot, which I think is readily available to most boxers, that could also make them hesitant to want to sign with.
yeah. At the end of the day, they lost a lawsuit, paid out. They're involved in other lawsuits, and you might like it or not, but Eddie Hearn hasn't had to deal with a lawsuit where he's paying out in mass to his talent. none of the other boxing groups have. They may have had lawsuits here and there that went out. I'm sure Golden Boy and Saul Canelo figured out their breakup with lawyers, but that's one guy, and they probably both walked away with some money. It's not uh, the kind of lawsuit with that Zuffa's been facing, where the entire class of fighters for 10 years sued them for being underpaid, and again, what's pretty clear is one of the things, and Dana probably, I don't know if he set out from the very beginning for this to be the case, but once the momentum picked up, he wasn't, he was very clearly not against it. And that is that the biggest star MMA has produced is Dana White by far. He's the guy on 60 Minutes. He's the guy who's introducing presidential candidates at the national conventions. He's the guy who is guests on every podcast where they want to talk to him, not about fights, but about business and style and things like that. And Dana's very vocal about giving his opinion. He's the biggest star by far that has come out of the MMA world, and Bob Arum is famous and Eddie Hearn is famous, and by being promoters, you're there for generations where fighters come and go. Even if they have long careers, they come and go under those promoters. So yeah, they have a certain level of fame, but you know, maybe maybe I don't watch enough, but you know, the UK's got a lot of political turmoil going on in their country as well. I don't know that, podcasts are inviting Eddie Hearn to talk politics, but Dana gets invited as a crossover star. He's now a star that's bigger than MMA. And I think that is something that people should have their antennas up over in boxing. That at the end of the day, he's become an entity that has to be fed. And why would you contribute to that?
Let me ask you this: what's to stop them from, say, doing like what Bob Arum did, where they go to the Olympics and they sign, you know, X amount of medal winners and start that way?
Sure, they can. They will probably have to overpay, because like I said, unlike MMA, Bob Arum already went to the Olympics in 2016. That whole class of Shakur Stevenson, and there were British fighters, and Teofilo Lopez. Like, I mean, there was a, a a large group of the guys that are near the top of the sport came from that Olympic class. So Bob Arum is probably, going to, or some groups are probably going to be watching next sets of Olympics and have been watching the Olympics and the amateur ranks for many years. And when somebody talented shows up, again, Zuffa is the first to see you, they offer you a contract. Still, you should go to Matchroom and see what Matchroom has for you to counter that. Whereas going to Hook and Shoot, and I'll use the group that I was associated with compared to Zuffa, was never going to happen. It's just not viable because Zuffa is the one with billionaires behind them, and we were just a small group out of Indiana, So you're not going to ask them to match, or that you might rather build your career there. But boxers, whether you like it or not, have options besides Dana, unless Dana is going to really overpay. And it doesn't, Dana's never really overpaid. That's why he got sued.
Yeah, I think probably the direction they would have to go then would be to, bring guys up who don't really have any recognition, to speak of yet, and try to do it that way. Would be the
Yeah.
make the most sense based off what. Plus, like you said, they're probably not gonna spend a lot on. They're not gonna try to outbid Matchroom and Golden Boy and all these others, initially
Right.
at least. So it'd probably be something where they're building up guys who don't really have a lot of recognition necessarily, and then trying to
Right.
market against it. These are the best guys. The
Yeah.
guys in top rank at Matchroom aren't, or whatever.
And that'll be clear. Boxing is such a scientific and a sport of real elite expertise that, if they're going to put together a 147 or 160-pound champion, from guys that are unknown and, do a 16-man tournament after guys get to 5-0, 6-0, then do a 16-man tournament, guys win more fights, and they wind up with a champion at the end who's undefeated and everything like that.
Hmm.
You're still gonna you'd be going up a wall trying to convince anybody that that guy's going to beat Terence Crawford. You know what I mean? You could say it, or my guy's better than Crawford, but you look foolish doing that. The top guys are the top guys at this sport. It's a fine line, but it's very clear. Um, you've got Naoya Inoue, a Japanese guy who's probably in the top three pound for pound in the world. Also, you think the Japanese interests are going to let him go?
No.
No way. So, so yeah, and again, you could crown a champion at bantamweight, and there was a moment where some of the hook and shoot champions would be able to have competed when around circa UFC 30. Some of our hook and shoot champions probably could have competed with some UFC champions. Keep in mind, UFC 30, they still didn't have all the weight classes or anything like that. But like, for example, one guy that held our belt was Chris Lytle. And, he didn't quite get to the UFC title. But he's beaten Matt Serra, who did. Matt Serra's also beaten him, but he was on that level. Lytle being one of the better guys. There are probably others if I get to thinking about it. Um, but again, that's not what he's walking into in boxing. You know, so if he, like I said, if you start crowning champions and the Zuffa champions and this, that, the other thing, if he were to take the risk of putting them in against the champions that hold the alphabet soup belts, it'll look like a bare knuckle guy against a real boxer in a real boxing match. If a real boxer goes to bare knuckle, then all bets are off. But if you're going to put gloves on him and do Marquis de Queensberry rules, the boxers are almost inevitably always going to beat the bare knuckle guys because the bare knuckle guys are a little more raw, a little more rugged, but are going to be short on technique. And that's what's going to happen if they have you know, a crowning of Zuffa champions from guys that are unknown. There's a reason why they're unknown. It's because their talent isn't there. You're not going to find surprises in boxing, just like you don't have NBA surprises unless in the extreme now you might find overseas uh still maybe an NBA guy that kind of surprises or surpasses his level and stuff like that. But boxing has been an international sport far longer than the NBA. And there's interest all over the world, Again, you think guys that control the Klitschko's and guys that control Lomachenko and Usyk are going to, these guys already exist. You think they're going to let their interest go or that they're missing talent in their area? Like, oh, we didn't see that guy. So, yeah, I think I don't want to say Dana's bitten off more than he can chew because he's also surprised, but he's older now. And he's starting from scratch. A lot of people build a career and then stay with that career because starting from scratch is a tall order. It requires a lot more energy, and we'll see how he does this time. But I'm still skeptical that Zuf was going to be a big player in boxing in the next 10 years.
Now, someone who did do a little bit of that was, Jake Paul with like Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor. Like, I didn't even know who they were before Jake Paul's boxing events, and they garnered a pretty good audience.
The capability, see, the problem with Jake Paul is that first, there's a big undertone of that most of his fights have been faked.
No, I'm talking about the people under him. My examples are Serrano and Taylor. These two people that gained a lot of popularity. And he just. It's not like he was. Yeah.
Serrano had paid her dues and not gotten very far until that, and made some money there. So my hats off to Amanda. She's
So
far
what
more
I'm saying is
talented.
maybe Zuffa could do
But
something like that. Is what I'm
but
saying.
Katie Taylor was an Olympian with a lot of pedigree and a lot of backing in UK. She didn't get too many new fans in the UK from appearing on Jake Paul's card. She may have gotten a payday, but here's the thing about it is Dana doesn't want to do. You could do if you're going to overpay, which maybe Jake Paul does, right? If you're going to overpay, like for example, even Dana gave up Conor McGregor because they overpaid him, right? So everybody gets a little bite. You can do a show or two, but Dana's talking about a sustained run of like taking over a sport, which means every week we're going to be watching Zuffa boxing, or he plans to have us watching Zuffa boxing like we're watching MMA, and he's going to have every fighter, and every fighter is going to want to fight for him and everything like that. That's not what Jake Paul did. Jake Paul put on circus events, which, yeah, and some of them have been more successful than others, right? So he's put on some duds too. Yeah, some that Amanda Serrano got paid by Jake Paul is a great thing for Amanda. And kind of even my hats off to Jake Paul for doing it, recognizing a talented boxer who'd never gotten paid or never made the money that she deserved, and maybe taking care of her. I don't know that she made $5 million either, you know, but that she was maybe able to parlay that into future paydays or appearances or something where she was able to lift her level of living and income up. Yeah, but I don't think Jake Paul could do that across 12 weight classes over the course of 5 years. They're circus events that he did, and that's not what Dana's talking about. Dana could do a Sphere or something in Saudi Arabia with a big show and overpay everybody and be like, yeah, boxing and Zuffa. But you're talking about potentially starting with guys 0-0 coming out of the Olympics and taking them all the way through crowning them as champions. This is a process. This is dozens, if not hundreds of shows that have to be planned. And Jake Paul has probably 10 shows under his belt. So it's not really comparable what they want to do. I mean, Jake, as much as I don't watch what he does and don't consider him for real, Jake has had an impact on the boxing world. But that's not the level of impact that Dana wants.
Yeah, it's been limited, and I would argue that Serrano and Taylor are probably the only ones who have garnered more popularity as a result of being affiliated with the shows. I don't think anyone else has.
Well, if yeah, like I mean, if Tyrone Woodley got a bigger payday than he'd ever gotten as UFC champion, stuff like that. Yeah,
Right.
people were grabbing some money and guys like that. You know, it's funny. Ben Askren fought him, and you think Ben made a lot of money, but at the end of the day, and I'm not a big Ben Askren fan in MMA or anything like that, but I really sincerely hope he recovers from the problems he's having. And how much money did he really make if he had to get bailed out by Jake? So again, this was a situation where Jake made money, and Jake has been making money and has other sources of income. So Jake paid for his operations. How come Ben didn't have the money to pay for his own operation if he made such big money?
Right.
So it's apples and oranges what Dane, at least what Dane is talking about doing compared to what Jake Paul's doing.
Yeah. I'm just kind of using those two girls as a an example of how someone can gain popularity on something other than the major platforms. Top Rank, Matchroom, Golden Boy. By having a great fight the first time, that's really what got them the popularity, and then doing it again. But yeah, so I think if they could sign some Olympians, like you're saying, or some people that have some pedigree and keep them away from the other players, maybe they could make it work that way. But it is going to be a challenging because, like you said, those guys can go to the other players and say, "Hey, this is what I'm being offered. Could you give me more or match it or whatever?"
Yeah, yeah. So we'll see, we'll see. But again, expecting him to do what he did in MMA is really, um, I don't even want to say high expectations, not realistic. It is a completely different landscape, a completely different sport that he's getting involved in, and he's starting from scratch. Whereas even he never started from scratch with MMA. He went out and bought the biggest company, or at least the company with the most potential at that point, and started at the top. Kind of, they were already kind of like we'd already let go fighters from hook and shoot contracts to go fight in UFC probably. Um, Before then, you know. So he started at the top in MMA, and now he's really starting from scratch. So it's going to be interesting to see how his so quote unquote is an incredible business acumen actually takes off here because the scenario is so different.
Now, one thing I heard him mention was maybe possible rule changes. You know, maybe that could set them apart from other events if they change some of their competitive rules.
Yep. But then here's the deal: is that it's not boxing. Boxing is Marquis de Queensberry rules. The Marquis de Queensberry rules go back 150 years now, more, and they already evolved from doing no gloves to gloves to chopping it down from, unlimited rounds to 75 rounds to one of the boxers I always bring up here. And like, I actually consider myself a pretty expert at the lightweight division in the era of 1910. Those guys, um, I had access to a lot of material, newspapers, and things like that when I worked for boxing companies on that era in particular. And Ad Walgas is actually the last guy fighting 45 round championship fights. 45 rounds. So the Marquis de Queensberry has already whittled down to what it is. And there's also, when you consider modern science and what we know about head trauma, the chance, what would be a rule change? A lot of times, one of the things that happens in boxing is if you get two guys that are really talented and really fit, and they kind of cancel themselves out, so they're not trying to kill each other in the fight. They cancel themselves out. You get into a real technical fight that's maybe called boring by a lot of fans. And at the end of 12 rounds, you've got guys that are breathing a little hard, but you definitely get the feeling that there are matches where they don't give their all. So maybe you go back to 15 rounds. That's going to be a tall order with the boxing commissions and with the scientific community now. And even the boxers, I think the boxers are smarter now. My buddy Ad Walgas, his idea of defense was putting his head down and letting you punch the top of his head, you know. Now guys put you know, a premium on defense because they really don't want to wind up, you know, in bad shape at the end of their career. And we've got ample examples of boxers who really, have difficulties towards, as they get older with communication and motor skills and things like that. So, yeah, what rules are you going to change? You're going to
Maybe
allow
this one,
elbow?
this one. Holding behind the head and hitting, I think would be something that could make fights more exciting. Because you can't do
Well,
that, and that's something that could.
yeah, yeah. I mean, again, I'm without I haven't seen the rules in a long time, so but again, that's not Marquita Queensberry rules. You
Mhm.
see what that looks like in BKFC. Um, you know,
Because when
so
guys cancel each other out, this is something they could go to, kind of an adjustment.
yeah,
Maybe this guy's
yeah,
running from me. This I can. You know,
yeah. If somebody grabs the back of my head like that in a boxing match, the way the boxing is now, I would close the distance, go body to body, chest to chest, clinch, and have the ref break us up and not take shots in that position.
yeah. I mean, yeah, that's the adjustment. That's what I'm saying. It's like right now because of the rules, like you're saying, where you have two guys that are pretty seasoned. You're not necessarily, if they're high level, you're probably not going to see a lot because there's not a lot of adjustments to make.
Yep.
From the skill standpoint, there's not many answers you can have.
If Dana could change the rules in boxing, he would have already done it. And this ties into the Muhammad Ali Act. Now there are much bigger players involved with changing the rules. Like in MMA, um, he famously had a sit down meeting with the New Jersey Boxing Commission where they outlined a lot of the rules and what they wanted. In there, Dana snuck in that MMA had to be in a cage. So that kind of eliminated a lot of the ability of people to use rings and things. A cage comes with some cost. Now they're probably, mass marketed and cheaper. But back in the old days, you had to have a cage built. It was an investment for a small promoter. So,
Maybe
but
they have an
putting
octagon shaped ring.
that's also been tried though.
Yeah,
Those types of things have been done. There's really not a lot of leeway to change the rules.
yeah,
And if you're an Olympic boxer, um, I think you want to compete under the rules that you're most comfortable with, you know? Um, so all of a sudden a rule change and stuff like that brings into mind, changing your training. Are you going to only fight under those rules exclusively for the rest of your career? Is there going to be crossover to other companies where you do Marquita Queensberry rules? Dana's got a lot on his plate. He might not be old enough to see this to the end.
right. Plus, he's got power slap and all this other stuff he's trying to do.
Oh yeah,
Slapstick, you know,
yeah,
as you call it. Yeah. One
slapstick.
one other thing I wanted to ask you about. Just because some people made a big deal out of it, I don't really think it was that big a deal. But on the 60 Minutes things where Dana White was kind of citing the UFC as the place for free speech, and um, we let people do whatever they want. But a lot of the media members are saying, well, he doesn't feel that way when it comes to the press, you know. And Errol Hawani kind of obviously got upset because he said, well, what about me? I made one mistake giving away those fights, announcing those fights. Why can't I get another chance, or something like that.
How about Miguel Torres?
Oh yeah, the fighter Miguel Torres. Yeah,
He made one bad joke and got himself cut, And it was a bad joke, but he's a young, dumb kid, Who takes seriously young, dumb kids? But we're in a cancel culture. The thing about it is that Dana's a control freak, So you're allowed free speech has become something that, you know, he's obviously a MAGA person. And, I'm not here I haven't lived in the United States in almost 2 decades. So MAGA, Democrats, really, I have no skin in the game. I don't care. I know the nation's very divided and stuff like that, but he falls firmly on one side. And this is one of those talking points that rallies a good percentage of the world around him, you know. And I don't think he's afraid of pissing off his opponents politically. Um, he said he doesn't want to be in. Interestingly, he's come out very strongly and say he doesn't want to be in politics. It's a very dirty, ugly game, and he doesn't want to be a part of that. Um, I'm pretty sure you can go back into the '80s and hear Donald Trump say that exact same thing. So I wouldn't rule anything out for Dana, and that's why he continues to dip his toes into the political side.
yeah. Plus, I think in Hero's case, if you release a fight, meaning Diaz McGregor, and then you're about to release Lesnar, or they get wind of it that you're about to release Brock Lesnar's return, and they tell you not to do it, that's not a mistake. You purposely made a decision to do that. You know what I mean?
I don't remember the details. The thing about Ariel is
That is
that
what happened. They approached him because first when he released was at the press conference. He was sitting there. He got news, so he dropped it then, which I'm sure was strategic on his part. And then when he was at the event, he was going to release it before they could put up their promo, and they told him not to, and he did it anyway. And yeah, that's not a
he got
mistake. Those are purposeful.
yeah, he got too big for his britches. He thought,
Yeah.
having a 500,000 followers or being on ESPN or whatever channel he was on for a little while, that he was, Teflon, but he found out he's not. The thing about Ariel is he's always, he's, I guess, one of the bigger journalists that the sport has produced, and he's had a long career and everything. So my hat's off to him. I'm not trying to put him down, but he's always had that kind of fanboy persona. You know what I mean? Um, so he was excited to tell the people about his fight and stuff like that. And he didn't do the right thing in terms of the business. If you're on the inside and you know things, you need to, like you said, you need to be smarter than that. You know what I mean? There are times where pushing the issue is worth it. There are times where being smart is worth it. And if you've got Zuffa asking for a little time so they can unload their media machine on there, and you want to, go out and get a million hits on a video and take home a $10,000 paycheck, and that is all you think about, and you ignore the fact that your all your money is made off of that company's success, and you're going to affect their success a little bit. Yeah, you're going to pay for it. So yeah, he looked at it like a fanboy back then, and hopefully, maybe he learned a business lesson. Now he sounds like maybe he hasn't. If he's thinking, "Hey, you didn't treat me fair. I didn't get free speech." It's like, yeah, you were a dumbass then, and you're a dumbass now.
So we got two big fights tonight, in my opinion. Ankalaev Pereira rematch, uh, uh, and then Sandhagen Rob, which is a fight I think a lot of people have wanted to see for a long time. What do you think about those two before we go?
Sandhagen certainly paid his dues, right? He's been around for a long time. He was pegged early as a guy that was maybe title material. He's got a tough fight, and you know, really, and we touched on this subject a lot. A sweep of Eastern Europeans this weekend would be really bad for the landscape of the sport overall. They could really use somebody to break through and break that stranglehold that those guys have. Um, like I said, it's almost like, I know Russia and those countries are involved in, a war and things that are, you know, very serious and, you know, worldwide repercussions possibly and things like that. But under different circumstances or in the future, I wouldn't be surprised if one of the big billionaires over there decided to start a company and sign up all those guys and then bringing people from other countries to fight them, and they could potentially become the biggest MMA company in the world. Um, because of the type of talent that they have. They're just Herrera's a guy who's got his type of talent. We'll see. Hopefully he doesn't get into that grappling type of fight that benefits Ankalaev. And Pereira's been a guy who's broken through and done big things, but that style is hard to beat. And that,
Well, and what was interesting about the first fight is it never really hit the ground.
yeah,
It was standing. He did push him against the cage quite a bit, especially as the fight went on. But early in the fight, it seemed like Ankalaev was getting the better of him standing up.
Yeah, Pereira's cautious. He was feeling him out, and yeah, he may have run into that thing where at some point, most fighters, after a lot of ring time, unless you're Max Holloway, I guess, but after a lot of ring time, you start to have trouble pulling the trigger. And Pereira looked like he was having maybe too long a feeling out process there, and he gave the guy a couple of rounds, and that was it. Then the other guy wasn't going to let up. Like I said, to me, I find the style a little bit efficient, but not crowd pleasing.
Hmm.
You know, um, so they win. Chimaev wins. These guys win. So how can you argue with that? But at the end of the day, we I think this weekend will be telling. If you have a Eastern European sweep, then you could almost formally say that we're in a completely new era where they dominate. And I think that's been the case now for a couple of years where we've been
Hmm.
there. But I think this would actually be seal the deal on it.
Yeah.
It's been there and it's not going to change. It's not like there's a lot of hope there. So we'll see.
Yeah, I agree with you because these are two fights where maybe you could see either guy winning, which usually
Yeah,
isn't the case when, you know,
that's why I said Sanhagen's paid his dues. A lot of people had him pegged. I remember I did a show with a relatively unknown guy who kind of left the podcast world, but the guy was real smart and real um, educated on the modern game. Whereas, like me at that point, I was still more of a historian. And Sandhagen, he said Sandhagen will be a champion in the very early part of Sandhagen's career. And that kind of thing. I always pay attention to when someone says this guy could be championship level because most people who say that are wrong. Um, I remember a guy named Crazy Bob Cook, who fans of the MMA world will remember from the old days. He told me a guy named Cain Velasquez, who was 0-0, would be a UFC champion one day. And guess what? Bob was right, you know. Um, so Sandhagen is on that Chris Lytle level right now, where he's a championship level fighter that may or may not be a title holder because of circumstance, because of who he faced and when he faced him. But yeah, Sandhagen has a chance, and Pereira, with his pedigree, you can't count him out. But I think for the good of the sport, we need one of them to break through.
yeah. Miguel, great stuff as always. People, we're gonna next episode, hopefully, we're gonna do a review of the Smashing Machine, which I think we can do well given our history in the sport. Especially Miguel is always a great historian when it comes to telling stories about um,
And
the
I've
past
got
fights and fighters. Yeah.
the thing about her is that, and I wonder if this man, I haven't seen it, and I've seen some preliminary reviews, but I wonder if they just stick to Pride and UFC in the MMA world, or if they actually delve into the Abu Dhabis. Um, but I would probably be one of the few people in the world that was with Mark through his Abu Dhabi run, including his loss at the end, but through his Abu Dhabi run in person live. Like, I mean, I was there and I saw him, and I know kind of person that he is, and I think um as gifted an athlete as he was, is that he just turned out to be good at this, but that his personality really wasn't made like a Mark Coleman, where Mark just loved to fight. I don't think Mark Kerr loved to fight. Coleman did. Um, and I think he had a sensitive side, and that's kind of how you wind up a drug addict, also. So I think it's a fascinating story. But yeah, just to, I remember when we were in Brazil, and Brazil is where he lost to Ricardo Arona, where his streak in Abu Dhabi finally came to an end. and we were sitting in the lobby of the hotel, and it was the organizers and myself, and fighters are we own the hotel. There's all the fighters are in the hotel, and fighters are coming up to us and speaking and stuff. And Kerr spent a couple of hours on the computers that were there was a wasn't even a business center. It was computers on a desk. But they were for public use there, and he spent a couple of hours on the computer, and then he came to the organizers table and handed us a list of painkillers and their generic names and the names in Portuguese. And he had been researching the drugs that he needed, And so at that moment, I kind of had that feeling that, Mark's in trouble, Before that, I saw the competition in Abu Dhabi where he was probably already on drugs, but um, it still didn't show that way. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, so I think I can bring a certain level of expertise to critiquing or hyping the movie if they did a good job. I'm sure. I think Marx is a story that deserves to be told. Um, it's a bittersweet story because there definitely was a moment where everybody in the world noticed him in the MMA world and fighting, and everybody thought the same thing. How in the world is anybody ever going to beat this guy? It has to be a thought that everybody had. Then when he went to Abu Dhabi and started winning there, again, that's not his world. He was targeted by every jiu-jitsu guy that wanted to try him, and I remember Carlos Barreto calling him out, and Barreto was a big physical black belt that was, equal in size to Mark. And he took Barreto out and won the money, won in Abu Dhabi, took home cash. Um, went on shopping sprees over there and stuff like that. So, and his is a story of going from the top to going to the bottom of the sport, and it was more self-inflicted than that the opponents caught up to him. So it's kind of that's my feeling of Mark Kerr, with all due respect. Um, it'll be interesting to see if the movie captures that.
Yeah, they said it really does. That even though it's a movie about fighting, the acting is what really stands out. And it's more about the human side of his life than it was. There's fighting stuff in there, but they said cinematography is really good. And yeah, almost everyone that I've seen review it said it's really outstanding. So
Yeah, I remember another time. I guess maybe Mystic Miguel. I don't think I predicted it, but maybe there definitely was a moment where it looked like that movie's not coming out. So I am very happy that it was told, and I hope Mark got a nice check, for himself, for contributing and putting his life out in that fashion. He did it before in other documentaries, but those didn't amount to making money. Now with this one, I hope that he's able to, live the rest of his life peacefully and without stress for money. He deserves it.
yeah. Oh, Miguel, always great stuff as always. And everybody watching this, like I said, we always appreciate you following the channel. And please subscribe, like the video, share them with someone if you think they're good. And until next time, we appreciate it. See you in the next episode. Take care.
Audio Jungle.